Hey class, today's set of notes is unit number 5, Natural Selection Classification. Part number 4, really looking at the 6 kingdoms. We're going to look at characteristics of the 6 kingdoms and a little bit about evolutionary relationships and how we determine them by different characteristics. So to begin with, we're starting off talking about phylogenetic classification and what that means. Well, really, it's pretty simple. We're looking at similarities and descent from a common ancestor. Those are the key words there. Similarities, descent of common ancestors. What it basically means is that there's the assumption that there's a common ancestor of living things, and that there's inherited traits and characteristics that are shared. And then at some point in time, through evolution of a species, that individuals develop these new characteristics and branch off onto their own separate branch. Looking at this in a visual way is called a cladogram, and this is our branching diagram that shows how very different organisms are similar to each other physically with certain shared characteristics or traits. This system of classification is based on phylogeny and those physical characteristics that they share. As organisms diverge, they keep inherited characteristics and develop new ones. So basically what we're showing is that evolutionary timeline moves this way, and the shared characteristics are anything up and above these points. So here we're saying jaws is the characteristic, that all things have jaws from here forward. And then we're saying the next thing is that all things have lungs from this point forward. And so we continue to add these new characteristics and narrow them down on this kind of evolutionary timeline. So we can see that we have very primitive species like a hagfish. It doesn't even have jaws. So there is no jaws here. Once the evolutionary trait of jaws is shown, we see that fish and salamanders and lizards and pigeons and mice all share those characteristics. We use some characteristics to determine evolutionary relationships and classify living things. Now, one of those characteristics would be structural similarities, and there are kind of 3 big structural similarities we look at in an organism's body plan, which is symmetry. We have asymmetrical, which our example is right here, in sponges. No matter way you cut this sponge, there's no way to get equal amounts on either side. This is asymmetrical. There's no specific body plan, and it's kind of just this hodgepodge. We have something that is radially symmetrical, like this sunflower sea star. It's symmetrical around in a circle or around this central axis. And then we have bilateral symmetry. An example would be this butterfly, and a lot of animals are bilaterally symmetrical. So we can see there's definitely some symmetry here, and there's definitely symmetry in a radial fashion here. So we have symmetry in any direction. Other characteristics we look at to determine evolutionary relationships would be the breeding behavior, the geographical distribution, chromosome comparisons, and biochemistry. Breeding behavior, typically we look at, are they going to be reproducing sexually or asexually? So here we have an example of sexual reproduction. Geographic distribution, we look at a species and how it's kind of spread out over a given area or related in proximity to other species as well. So we have a map of geographic distribution here. Chromosome comparisons, the number of chromosomes is the biggest thing. Size and shape and all that stuff comes kind of secondary. So really we can see different organisms here in this picture. And pea plant has 14 chromosomes, a cat's 38, pufferfish 42, human 46, and a dog 78. So dogs have more chromosomes than we do. And then biochemistry, what percent of commonality of genes between different organisms, genes or DNA sequences. So we can see this here. You're 98% similar genetically, or genes that we know of to a chimp, 92 to a mouse, 44 to fruit fly, so on. So right now, what you can do is I would take a whole page out of your notebook, I'd turn it sideways, the long way, create this kind of 6-column organizer here, and this will be the notes for the rest of this section. This is a good way to keep this straight and use it as a good reference for class. So we're going to be looking at the 6 kingdoms in terms of their their types of cells, body form, how they obtain food, and if they have complex organ systems. And we can fill in some of the missing pieces in class if we don't get it all right now. So to begin with, there are 6 kingdoms. Their 6 kingdoms are organized in 3 separate domains. So eukarya are the eukaryotes, archaea and bacteria here are 1, 2, 3 domains. And then here's our 6 kingdoms. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. All right, so we're going to go through each one of those kingdoms. When we talked about common ancestors, here's something I want to point out. We have common ancestor somewhere along the way. Eubacteria are one of the most primitive things, one of the earliest living things around. Archaebacteria as well. Protists, plants, fungi, animals, right? All these things kind of branch off and on our evolutionary timeline. So the first kingdom, number 1, is Animalia. Animalia is about 3 million species. 76% of living things are animals. They're eukaryotic, no cell wall, reproduce sexually. They're heterotrophs, that's how they get energy. They're multicellular, and they have complex organ systems. The next kingdom are plants. We call that Plantae. Plantae is 500,000 species, 15% eukaryotic. They can reproduce sexually or asexually. They have cell walls, so they have complex organ systems. They're autotrophs. They make their own food, and they're multicellular. Fungi, 100,000 species, 5.6%. They're eukaryotic. They have cell walls. They reproduce sexually or asexually as well. They're heterotrophic, so they're decomposers. Remember, that's a review from ecology. Most are multicellular. We do have some that can be in the unicellular category, but the majority are multicellular. Protista is the next one. Protista are protists. We looked at these guys under a microscope and in pond water. 70,000 species, only 2.8% of living things. Eukaryotic. Protists kind of do everything. All right, they could be, they're eukaryotic. They reproduce sexually or asexually. They can have cell walls. They don't need to have cell walls. They can be heterotrophs or autotrophs. They can be unicellular or multicellular. So they can be a lot of either or. Protists are unique organisms in that regard. The first of the bacteria kingdoms, Archaebacteria, 500 species, 0.03%, oldest prokaryotic cells. They have cell walls, live in harsh environments. We call them extremophiles. So places like the deep sea ocean floor next to vents, really harsh environments, extremely salty water, places where other things don't really live, they live. They can reproduce asexually or sexually. They can be autotrophs or heterotrophs. Second bacteria, last kingdom we'll talk about is the Eubacteria. Those are 10,000 species, 0.3%. So there's a little more Eubacteria, newer prokaryotic cells. Same characteristics, Archaebacteria, but they kind of live everywhere else except for those extreme environments.